Welcome to Reading the Gospels Together for Wednesday, September the 2nd. And today we're reading Acts chapter 22. And if you haven't listened to yesterday's study, I encourage you to do so to put what happens next into context. Because Paul is addressing the very crowd that moments before was intent on beating him to death for violating the temple with Gentiles and undermining the Jewish faith through his blasphemous belief in Jesus as Messiah and the Son of God. And to address them, Luke points out that Paul spoke to them in Aramaic, a language more or less extinct today, but which was then the language of the home and street among Jews in Israel. Not Jews elsewhere. Jews outside of Israel spoke Greek. Not Hebrew, that was for religious services and for the priests. No, he spoke Aramaic, and in doing so he was saying, I am one of you. And so, says Luke, they listened. And what they heard was yet another rendition of Paul's Damascus Road conversion experience. We hear some details that we haven't heard before, such as more background to Paul's mission to eradicate the Christians. And we hear, too, words spoken to Paul when he fell into a trance at none other spot than the very temple itself, where the Lord, Paul says to him, "Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles." Now, I'm not sure what Paul was hoping for in explaining himself in this way, but as soon as the crowd heard the words, "I will send you to the Gentiles," implying that God was favoring the Gentiles over his own people, the Jews, the riots started up again with the rallying cry, "Rid the earth of him, he is not fit to live," which is not the reaction I want to one of my sermons. So once again, it is the Romans to the rescue, but this time with the intent to teach this troublemaker a lesson and have him flogged and interrogated in that order. And Luke tells us that while they were stretching Paul out to do just that, Paul casually says to the centurion, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty?" Well, the answers are pretty strong. No. And the centurion in charge of the flogging scurries off to find the commander to ask what on earth to do now, as they're all in danger of being accused of grave offenses against a Roman citizen. Now, about this law, it's called the Porcian Law, after the juror Porcius. The Roman historian Livy writes, "The Porcian Law alone seems to have been passed to protect the persons of the citizens, imposing, as it did, a heavy penalty if anyone should scourge or put to death a Roman citizen." And that scourging is just about what was going to happen to Paul. The later Julian laws upheld the Porcian laws, where it says, "Also liable under the Lex Julia on public violence is anyone who, while holding imperium or office, puts to death or flogs a Roman citizen contrary to his right of appeal." Now, heavy penalty can mean an awful lot in Roman law. Now, in the last chapter, I'd intimated that Paul had identified himself as a Roman citizen. Actually, the words he used were, "I'm a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city." Now, doubtless, the commander assumed that Paul was speaking about Tarsus when he said, "of no mean city." But Paul was actually, wink, wink, implying Rome. Now, citizenship has its value, and for a Roman citizen, it meant that you were entitled to a trial before you received punishment. Paul played this card before, back in chapter 16 in Philippi, scaring the wits out of the magistrates, and it works here again. We're even given a neat little vignette. The commander has Paul brought to him, and he says, "I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship." A bit of an under-the-table method. Not quite like buying a false passport, more like working a shady PNP angle. And Paul replies, "I was born a citizen," which is much more prestigious by far. So now the commander is in a bind. He's narrowly avoided the heavy penalty, and he decides to go the extra mile to ensure that Paul has no cause for complaint. To get to the bottom of it all, he first releases Paul from custody, but don't go too far, he probably added. And he calls together a meeting of the chief priests and the Sanhedrin to find out why a riot breaks out whenever this guy Paul is around. Paul now has an opportunity to address the highest authorities in Jewish faith and law, and he doesn't waste his chance. Or does he? Find out tomorrow with chapter 23, and we'll see you then.